So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I am live at our Infragistics global headquarters in New Jersey. We have a whole live audience here in front of us, which is rare for these webinars. Usually I'm in my home office, which is nice to see people. So there could be some live Q&A. There's a few dozen people here in our training room, and we're doing a lot of fun stuff here in New Jersey in the last couple of days. And in fact, George is also in New Jersey. He's about 3 miles away. He opted to do his piece of the webinar today from his home office, and then he's coming in to spend the afternoon showing us some of the next generation stuff here to the team on what he's been working on. So with us today is the usual A-team, Konstantin, our Director of Product Development, George, of course, who is all things App Builder and Indigo. Zdravko is also on the line, and so is Jesse and JJ, who set everything up and handle everything for us. So today is all about Ignite UI and App Builder. We're going to cover some of the new features that we've shipped in the last several months, and there could be, some stuff that we've just shipped throughout the year, all the supporting capabilities of the product. Ignite UI, if you didn't see your most recent emails, we've upgraded to the latest versions. We did a webinar on React a couple weeks ago, so we started to talk about that React data grid. You're going to see some of that today, along with some of the new Angular and Blazor capabilities in the product. Quick housekeeping, please use the chat and send the chats to everyone if you have a question, and someone will answer it online or use the Q&A. We will send a follow-up email tomorrow with a recording along with the slide deck. So you'll be able to share this with your colleagues at work, etc. And there's a couple links here. So before we get right into the demos, because we want to spend most of today on demos, I just want to highlight the 3 pillars of what we are working on here at Infragistics for the products that we're bringing to you to help you deliver great experiences to your customers. Number 1, App Builder is obviously the big focus. We have a webinar every 2 weeks, basically, on App Builder, something new, something coming. And hopefully if you've seen the direct investment this year on just delivering more capabilities in the product, so you have to write less code, and that continues on and on. George will talk a little bit about that today. He's going to demo some of this new work that we've done, and then he'll just talk about some of the things that are going to ship in the January-February timeframe, which are really exciting, especially when it comes to how we're handling variables, routing, etc., which is game-changing in terms of productivity. The second area, of course, is UI controls, keeping up with the latest and greatest with Angular, which is what we're doing, delivering brand new capabilities in React, which we just shipped a couple months ago. I did that webinar a few weeks ago on the new React grid, and then looking at all of the new components that we continue to deliver across Angular, React, Blazor, and web components, and that will continue. So some of the big things coming, of course, in Q1 around UI components are the hierarchical grid, which we've talked about a lot, getting that just right now, it's only in Angular, but delivering it in Blazor, web components, and React. And then the third item, next generation charting. You're going to see some of that today in George's demo on a release we just did yesterday through App Builder with some new charting capabilities. But you will continue to see some incredible features in the charting components that we're shipping. I think the webinar we did maybe about 2 months ago when I demoed the new chart toolbar and some of those capabilities, and we did a poll, and one of the poll questions was, will you use the new chart toolbar? And like 70% of you responded, yes, we can't wait to try it out. So if you have tried the new chart toolbar, please give us feedback. We want to hear it, but we're continuing to improve that as well. So very exciting stuff coming in the data visualization and charting space. But to highlight what we're trying to do here with App Builder, and we look at App Builder as a platform. When Konstantin talks about App Builder, it's about a platform. Everything starts with the design system. The design system surfaces as UI kits in Figma or Sketch, And then with those UI kits, you can design experiences with your design team and then flow those into real apps in App Builder. The idea is that everything that you design is going to be the same no matter which platform you choose. So if you're starting in Figma and you design a grid and you want to get that grid into an actual running grid that's bound to data, you can flow it through App Builder and just generate that code. That whole process takes seconds. It's just done, right? Now, what if you don't want to start with Figma or Sketch? You don't have to. You can just start with App Builder, design something out, or just npm install Ignite UI React and start hand coding your stuff, without any of the tooling. But what we're trying to do is not only deliver the core components, we're delivering the accelerators on top of it. What are those accelerators? The design systems, app builders, CLIs, and other things that really drive your productivity. And that won't stop. We're continuing to work on that in every release, and every release for us is about every month. So here's an example of a grid. I'm pretty sure this grid was done as a web component. It might be Angular or Blazor. I'm not sure. It was from something the dev team did, but it doesn't matter because this is the same exact grid you would see on every single platform. Same behavior, same capability, same performance, React, Angular, Blazor, web components, doesn't matter. You could build this in App Builder in minutes and then generate the code and then run it live on your desktop. And that's really the experience that we're trying to deliver. And that's what we want you to try out in the product. So hopefully today, if you haven't tried App Builder or Ignite UI, you're inspired to do so with some of the demos that you're going to see. And if you're an existing customer and you're using the product, please, we want to hear your feedback because we consistently want to improve with every single release. So with that, let's get right to the demos. George, I am going to let you share and you can kick it off and then hand it over to Constantine when you're done.
All right. You should be seeing my screen now. So let's just start off with the latest thing we just added yesterday, or maybe even today, is we are adding more components, as we know, and financial chart is one such special component which really helps customers who are in the financial vertical. And with the financial chart, the experience is just as simple as we did for our category charts. And if you are not familiar with category charts, the distinction we make is, if I just pull up my category charts here, the category charts are the basic ones, the column, area, point, and spline. And as you know that we make sure that all of our charts here are actually working with the REST API and the data is actually fetched dynamically. The same thing we have done for the financial chart. And the financial chart automatically comes with a lot of goodies baked in. And the one thing you would see is that it's showing the candlestick kind of chart right now. So this is the candle. And of course, you can just switch directly from here. You don't have to do anything extra in order to be able to switch using this toolbar here. And on top of that, let's just try again here, back to candle. And this chart is dynamic. So what that means, like all the zooming capabilities work naturally. And then we have the zoom bar actually built in to allow you to scrub through your data. And then we have these filterings, which are baked in also into the toolbar, right? So you can click between year to date and all the data you have in your data set. And then for financial customers who might know this more than I do, is this bunch of overlays like this Bollinger Bands, price channel, and all of these features are actually baked into the chart. And all you need to enable is to just enable it. And then the chart would actually render it dynamically really, really quickly. Same thing for trend lines, if it's a logarithmic fit, exponential fit. And as you also see, there are some standalone indicators which will stack automatically into the chart. So if I just add those panels, you would see these panels are getting added dynamically into this chart. Now for the chart component, in order for this chart to work, we basically need a data set which provides us this kind of a data like open, high, low, and close. And as I said, there's no smoke and mirrors here. So if I go to the editor here, let me just create a brand new view. And the experience for creating this financial chart is I can always go to my toolbox and add a financial chart here. I can just search for it. Or I can just do Alt-click and just say financial chart. And then just add the financial chart with our dummy data. And in the toolbox here, I have actually added an API. And then let me show you what this API provides us. So if I say configure APIs, as you know that we have this Swagger UI built into App Builder, allowing you to query data and get responses. So here I have this stocks API, which expects a symbol. And if I test this endpoint, you would see that it provides me all the information I need for any particular stock. Same thing for the stock prices based symbol. Again, I'm providing it a parameter, which is expecting a symbol. And I have a symbol here. I say send. And here, if you look at the data, it's actually providing a nested array, which is showing me the date stamp and the open, high, low, close, and volume. Now, this is the beauty of the financial chart, is when provided data of this nature. So that's what I'm going to do here. I say close. I go to my chart, and under data, I'm going to pick the financial chart the API I just added. So I go to financial chart, and I go to stock prices, and that's it. It's just expecting me to provide you, what the symbol is as the value. But I'm going to use this capability in a slightly different way, because it kind of also touches upon the other thing I'm going to talk about today, which is selection detail using variables. But for now, you can see that it's actually bound to that data. It's able to fetch that data and able to render it directly. Now, the enhancement I did is related to another feature we released just prior to the previous release. And if I hit play here, I go back to my financial chart, the interaction I want to talk about is the ability to use variables to dynamically get a fresh chart, right? So in this case, I have a list which is bound to data, and this data is being fetched from one of the API endpoints I have. So I have a list item which is being repeated based on the FinTech API, and I'm getting an array of stocks. But what I have basically done is with this new selection detail capability, which I'll show you again, but basically what it allows me to do is when I click on my charts here, you can see that the chart is actually bound. So everything updates real time, and it's able to bind really quickly to the freshest data possible. So now that I've talked about variables, that's something which we released prior to this one. So I'm going to go to my variable sample. And here it's a very simplistic line of business sample you have seen everywhere, is that I have a list of customers, and then I have this area here which shows customer details. And then I have a list of orders for this particular customer. And then for every particular order, I want to see the order details. So the way the app works is because I have already wired this up. When I click through my customers here, you can see that the details area is being updated. The customer orders is updated. And when I interact with that customer orders area, you can see the orders detail area is also being updated. Now, we did this with the capability of variables, right? And what we allowed you to do now is to be able to create variables inside of App Builder. You can actually update the variable value based on an interaction event. And then you can actually make API requests using this variable instead of static data. And once you have got that data all fetched in, we are allowing you to bind that variable component property to the variable. And then, of course, you have a UI for managing variables. And this is the other new change we are introducing, is that now we have a single location for allowing you to have visibility into what variables are being used in this particular application and be able to manage it from that particular single location. So let me just give you a quick view of how this app was actually created. I go back into the editor, and it's just a very simple layout. I have a 2-column structure. In one of the columns, I have a list, and the list items is being repeated based on the data from an API, and I'm getting an array of customers. I have this section here, and here I'm showing you some title elements, but the only difference is that these are actually bound to variables, right? So I'm going to show you how the variables was created. The grid also has now been improved to be powered by an API request. So here is a GET request, and it's a parameterized endpoint. So it's saying only show me orders for a certain customer. Again, this also benefits from the use of variables here. They have a variable called var customers. I'll show you right now. And then the same thing for order details. It's actually also getting its order ID from another variable called var order ID. Now, what I mentioned about having a single place of where variables live. So if I have this particular app and I want to see where the variables are, we have now introduced a new toolbar item called variables. And if I click into it, by default, it'll automatically show me all the local variables or any global variables which are available for this particular view. But if you're just curious to get a sense of a bird's eye view, I can always step back. And now it's going to show me all the view context I have. And this is a pretty big app I have, which is like my kitchen sink app, which shows all the component demos. And here I can actually see whether there are any global variables present or any local variables present. So in this case, you can see that the selection detail is the one I'm on. It has 3 variables defined. And then I have another one for financial chart, which has only 1 variable defined. And I can actually take a pick, but it won't make sense to you because it's kind of out of sync. So I can just go back into the one I was showing you right now, selection detail. And here you can see I have 3 variables available, one called an object, which is getting me customer data. Then I have another variable for customer ID. I don't end up using it in here. And then I have one for VAR order ID. And the way you can see this customer variable is that we allow you to initialize any variable from an API request. And that's what I've done here. So I can say VAR customer, it's initialized from an API request. And it's saying, okay, what's the API you're getting from? And then I can just see what values I've been pumping in. So in this case, I put in a static value because it's just on load. So I'm saying when the app loads, I want you to fetch data from here. And it automatically detects the data type for this particular variable. If I go to this VAR order ID, you can see this is of a variable of a different type. It's a numeric kind of a variable. I'm not initializing this variable. But if I do want to create variables from scratch, we have also made it really easy for you to just go into an object and say, okay, from what API I should get my variable definition. So you don't actually have to type in any default values. You can get that value directly from the API. And once I have these variables already set up, we also exposed both a click-based interaction in order to trigger a certain action under interaction. So here, typically, when somebody creates a variable, if I remove my interactions completely, this app doesn't work anymore. But in order for me to rehydrate the interactions, I can just say on click, I say not navigate. And this is something new we had added. We can say set variable. And now it's asking me which variable do you want to set and where does the value come from, right? So in this case, I would say, you know what? I want to set the VAR customer, which is an object. So every time somebody clicks on this list item, I want to store I want to update variable customer. And the value, it comes from the data context. So I have repeated that particular list based on the customer endpoint. So I can just say, okay, just get me the whole object from customers. And that's how simple it is to set up variable interactions or updating variables from a list. But when we come to components like the grid, we expose more native row selection event. Everything stays exactly the same. The only difference is that now I am triggering the set variable action from a row selection change event. And here I'm doing the same thing. I have the VAR order ID, which I showed you how I declared it. And the value, I'm saying I don't want the whole object, but we are actually showing you the event data comes from a selected row. I can, of course, drive in and get a specific field. I can say order ID, and that's about it. And now that the variables have all been hydrated based on this click interaction, anytime I go into the static text here, I can actually bind it to real data. So I can go to my content area. Let's just remove this binding for now. I can add the binding back. And you can see that the VAR customer now shows up as an object which can be drilled into. So I can just drill in and say, you know what? I want to show customer ID. And that's as simple as it to create these kind of bindings. And same thing for the grid. As I showed you, it's the same thing. Instead of having a static value, I can now bind it, and we're going to show you all the list of variables in your application. And I would say this one comes from, this endpoint expects an ID from VAR customer. I'm going to say customer ID, done. And for the second thing, I've done the exact same thing. The only difference is that here I'm setting on row interaction, I'm setting a VAR order ID and an order ID. And that's how this application is actually wired up. So in quick summary, I just showed you very quickly how we allow you to create variables, how you can update the variables, how you can pass in a variable in the API request. We talked about how you can bind the component property to the variable, and then management of the variables in your application. Now, with this management UI and the variable interaction, naturally, we are also going to work on some new things, which are going to come very shortly, which is not released yet. But we would be including this ability to route, between viewpoints by clicking. So this is a grid, and I'm using a custom display thing, which we had introduced in the past. If you're not familiar with that, it's grid with templates. Allows you to create really beautiful looking grids using custom display templates. And that's what I did for this particular feature here for route with params. I added a link, and in this link, I'm actually, every time I click on it, it would take me to a details page and populate the exact same sample I was showing you. The only difference is that this is relying on a route parameter, allowing you to do these kind of master detail kind of drill-ins in App Builder. And as you can see, slowly and steadily, it's not just the component story. We have a very rich styling story, very rich, layout story. And on top of the component story, we are now adding more dynamic data from Swagger or OpenAPI. And now you can actually do something with this data in order to do these kind of navigations, right? So I talked about selection details, routing with templates, grid with templates. It's something which is old, but it is very useful in terms of how you've done it. I also talked about how I use the same selection detail kind of concept in order to power these kind of dynamic updates to the financial chart. Now, before all of this, Jason mentioned the notion of Figma, and Figma is a beloved tool for people who like to start in design, pure vector design tools. And now we actually have 3 UI kits available in Figma. So if I switch over to Figma here, you can see that if I go into the Figma community, you will see that there are 3 UI kits, the Bootstrap being the latest one which we're introducing today. It basically means that you can create the exact same capabilities you had in Material and Fluent, but now you can have a Bootstrap look and feel for your applications when designing in Figma. And if you're curious on how to get to these resources, if you're not already a Figma user, if you're a Figma user, you can go to community and just look for Infragistics and you'll get all the access you need. But if you're inside of App Builder and you're curious to try, you can always go to the main menu here. I go to my user profile, and then we have this link called Get Indigo Design System. And that would show you all the resources we have made ready for you to try out Figma. So this is the indigo.ui kit. It'll link you directly to the Figma URL. And then we have a plugin. For those who are not familiar, is that once you create designs in Figma, this allows you to publish those designs into App Builder, and we automatically parse your design files and create these UIs and components dynamically for you. And then we have sample files for you to download and actually pull it up in your application in Figma in order to have a starting point for your app. If you have never seen the UI kits, I have this open here. So here is an example of the Figma UI kit. And we are trying to make it really easy because this is a very painstaking process for designers to have to create all these UI kits. But it's not the full story, because if you're just dealing with UI kits and don't have a matching component story, then the design to development workflow ends up being very, haphazard and broken. But with our UI kit story, we have a 1:1 map between the components we are showing in the UI kit and the components we have in the developer toolkit, allowing you to make the seamless handshake between these two components. So here, as you can see, we are seeing just the buttons UI, but naturally it has all the components you actually see in an App Builder toolbox, which is why Jason was mentioning you can start in Figma or you can start directly in App Builder. It's completely your choice. And now I'm going to switch over to the Fluent. It's exactly the same. I just wanted to show you how it looks. So if I go to my buttons, you can see that it's the same UI kit, but now it's flavored very differently, right? And that is what we are trying to offer with these very exact identical UI kits for each kind of this design flavor. And naturally, once you're in App Builder, you may or may not be familiar, but we have these themes already built in under our default themes, we have the material light, the material dark, fluent light, fluent dark, bootstrap light, bootstrap dark. And that allows us to have a very different look and feel for our components. And I'll just end on that note, is that if I go here, if I show you one of our my kitchen sink, this is like the inputs, how they look in material. And if I go back to my designer, I go to my fluent, and you can see that this is immediately it's transformed into the look and feel of what a fluent UI would look like inside of App Builder. And all of this stuff is what's now enabled to you when you try to create these designs inside of Figma. So with that, I'm going to hand it back for the next phase of our webinar. For App Builder and for your demo, I'm complete.
Awesome. Thanks, George. We'll hand it off to Constantine now to talk about some of the new stuff on the UI component side. Constantine, take it away.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, George. Now, let me share my screen. So what I'm going to talk about today is, I hope you're seeing my screen. Can you just confirm that? See it? Okay, perfect. So now that you've seen and hopefully you're using App Builder, you know that this platform reduces a lot of time and it eliminates handoffs between design teams, development teams, and stakeholders. It's really something that revolutionizes development for the web because it combines all of the three pieces that you need in order to produce a small or a large web application. But what powers it? Ignite UI. Ignite UI is a product family which delivers components and capabilities for all modern web frameworks. Starting with Angular, going through Web Components and React, and ending with Blazor, both WebAssembly and server. We have components across the board with parity matching the design system we deliver. The design system that George was showing is entirely backed by components. Actually, the design system is the conception of a component, and then the actual implementations are delivered to all different platforms. So you're already probably familiar with all of the products that we have in terms of dev tools, but what's new in Q4? I'm going to start with Angular, as this is the oldest and most mature product in the Ignite UI product family at the moment. Not considering the legacy ones, but with Angular, we're always up to date. So Angular 17, for example, got released in November. The very next day, we had an update to Angular 17 of our library and of all of the components. What does that mean? It doesn't just mean a version bump. If you go to our blogs, you will see that we have published, thank you, Dion, we have published a blog talking about the new Angular control flow. So Angular 17 had a renaissance, the version 17 had a renaissance for Angular. And all of the Angular team is talking about this milestone where, this is really a renaissance and a rebirth of this framework. So they introduced new control flows. They introduced built-in directives where you no longer need to import anything, but you can directly write ifs or fors within your templates or switch statements. They also introduced deferrable views within views themselves. So far, up until 17, the only thing you could defer are Angular modules. So what does that mean? You can lazy load only particular blocks of your application upon navigation. Now you can do that upon interaction within the view. And Dion wrote an extensive blog of how that also is usable with our components. So we power the UI. You can use all of the features of the Angular framework. The very next day, a version gets released. Now, second of all, Angular was moving towards the concept of standalone components instead of modules. We are also delivering all of the Ignite UI for Angular components as standalone components. So we introduced this in version 16, actually. The notion of standalone components within Angular was developer preview with Angular 14 and 15. Then it got released. We also released a developer preview of all of our components with 16. In fact, all of our components were standalone at 16. So if you continued using modules, ng modules, that means that you were just importing the exported standalone components. We wanted to go through a full version of, making sure that everything works as expected. No issues were found. With 17, standalone components are now official. So it's no longer a developer preview on our end. I can use them as is. Another thing that we improved with 17 tremendously, and we actually started with 16.1, is tree shaking. So we deeply care about the size of the bundles that are being produced when Ignite UI for Angular is being used within an application. They need to be as small as possible. You need to only get the code that you use. So you use a chip component only, you get only the code for a chip component. You use a select the switch and the radio button, you only get the code for select, switch, and radio buttons. So what the improvements in the tree shaking, the improvements that were done in tree shaking were related to animations being correctly tree shaken, all of the localization resources being correctly tree shaken. The components were mostly fine. We did some improvements to the grid, for example, but the components in general were okay. And now, if you build an application using Ignite UI for Angular, and as I said, if you use only, for example, a chip component and an icon component, the bundle size that will come from our library is less than 50 KB, because those are small components. If you add a switch on top of that, and a checkbox and a radio button, you're still gonna stay within the 60K range coming from our library. So you're not using the grid, you're not going to get the 300 KB that the grid needs in order to execute all of its features. Now, another big thing with Angular 17, again, this was kind of introduced as a preview in 16.1, but that's the size. So far, the way that you could size components were using display density. And display density is something that you configure in Angular code, not in CSS. But sizing is part of the theming story. It's one of the 5 vectors of theming, together with color palettes, typography, elevations, and shape, right? So sizing also needs to be controlled through CSS. Now, not that it wasn't working with display density. It's working perfectly. You could even apply it on an application level using an injection token in Angular and set display density for an entire application. So that if you want COSI for all of your components, you just set COSI on an application level. But again, that's an Angular thing. And we ship those components not just in Angular. They're shipped in web components, they're in React, they're in Blazor. And you got to be able to do the same thing there. But with an injection token, you can, right? We can still transfer all of the properties, and then you can say to the grid, okay, your display density is COSI, but you got to do this to every component. So now we introduce IG size in theming. What does that mean, and how does it affect you? So I'm going to show, this actually the samples application, but running standalone, not within a docs context. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open it up. Let me see if this is the correct one. You see it's running. I'm going to open it up, and within the body tag, I'm going to say, set this variable IG size to IG size small. Now I'm going to wait for it to recompile and rerun. Just switch back to the application, but you're going to see what's going to happen. So I added one line in CSS. This is the styles.scss top level item. And voila. All of my components are now with a small sizing. And this is now a part of the theming story. It's no longer something that you got to configure in the component itself. Can you use that for individual pieces of the application instead of the entire application? Of course. You can use it per instance, per view, per module, per application. Why? Because you can scope your IG size setting wherever. You can scope it within a component, you can scope it within a view, you can scope it on an instance, right? And so now we give you control entirely through CSS to change the sizing of your application everywhere. And since this is a CSS property, it applies to web components, it applies to Blazor, it applies to React. This is what I had for Angular. Now I'm going to move on to web components. So web components is something that we keep updating just like every other component set. It's not the same code base as Angular. So don't think, this is just like the Angular component taken and dumped into web components. It's actually, a native web component code base on top of lit. So the latest release for web components is 4.6.0, which you will see actually, came out very recently. It came out on December 5th. With this release, we're introducing a text area component, a button group component, a toggle button, which is required actually for a button group component, a lot of ARIA accessibility improvements. We updated to lit version 3, and we've worked a lot on reducing the CSS size. And there's one other thing, but I'm going to get to that, at the very end. So you see now I opened the storybook for our web components product. There is now a text area. We were missing actually this from the input set. And, it's a multi-line thing. You're watching the Q4 release webinar. Enjoy. As I said, we have a new button group component. It matches the button group component that we have in Angular, and it has the same modes, but now you also can use it in web components, in React, and in Blazor. All right, so you know how button groups work. There's multiple selection modes, so I can have a single required where I always need to have a selection. I cannot deselect a button. I also can have multiple where more than one item can get selected. This is also showing the toggle button. You see, the button now has a state. If you use a toggle button, it can be selected and then deselected. For the accessibility improvements, I'm not going to turn on the screen reader because, that can actually be confusing for a webinar, but we are very committed to accessibility. It has to be implemented everywhere because it's not only important, it makes the web, usable by people with disabilities. As I said, we reduced tremendously the CSS size of the themes that come with web components. So you have better scoping, you have unnecessary things trimmed out. But there is one other thing that I wanted to show, which is actually a lot of people have asked for this. You know how on the Angular grid, we have a state persistence feature, which allows you to actually create individual state for users or for workspaces, persist it, and retrieve it back and reinstantiate the application with the given state, which can differ from user to user. Now, this is now also available in web components. So if I go here, you see that there is a new sample called state persistence, and you can do exactly the same thing as in Angular, but with the web component grid. So, just quickly, because I don't want to, show something and not show it working. I'm going to sort this column. I'm going to apply some filtering here. And what should I do? Oh, maybe group by city. All right. So now I'm going to say save. Let's navigate away from the application. And then I'm going to go back. And voila, the state is actually, restored to whatever I just said. All right. But web components, people weren't only asking for this feature in web components. They were asking for it in Blazor and in React. So let's go to Blazor real quick. Search for state. And as you can see, we have the state persistence also in Blazor. So now you can get your user-specific state for the UI save it in a database, and when they come back, load it back from the database and restore the grid with that state. So right here, have some saved state. Let's ungroup, save, leave, loading, loading, loading. And when it loads, I'm going to come back. And then actually, you know what? I can directly come back. Yeah, it restored. I removed the grouping, and as you can see, the grid restored without the grouping, but with sorting.
Awesome.
So now I'm going to go to React, okay? And very recently, we did a webinar that we released this grid in React. So the grid looks exactly the same as in Angular, as in Blazor, as in Web Components. And now we added the state persistence also here. By the way, what I'm showing, it was released today. So the Figma UI kit for Bootstrap is not the only thing that we released today. The state persistence also got released today. By the way, you will see that the state is being restored to the same state that I had in Blazor. We use local storage for this sample. So it's saved in local storage on my browser, and now I can restore state across technology, right? Because it's the same key that we are using, and it's the same type of state. I mean, the keys inside are exactly the same. So you see that I'm even doing state persistence and restoring between technologies. All right. So this was Angular, Web Components, React, Blazor. George already mentioned new UI kit released today, the one for Blazor. Actually, very soon you can expect the fourth UI kit, which is for the Indigo theme. But I want to, finish the things with one other demo for which I'm going to come back to App Builder. So what I'm going to show now is not released yet, but it will very soon be released. It's going to come in Q1, most likely by the end of January, but, don't quote me on that. So I have a simple app that I put together in App Builder just for demo purposes. I have a master view with some navigation, nav bar, a grid here, some cards here, on another view. But what you will notice now, and let me just zoom in a little bit. You will notice that here I have a different target and it says React. So far, what you could do with App Builder is generate Angular, Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor Server, or Web Components. Now we're finishing the code generation story by also introducing code generation for React. This is a preview. It's very early stage. So, something blows up. It's not my fault. It's the development team fault. No, I'm just kidding. But what I'm going to do is let's go in preview and let's see the code. It's a React code. Now I have a generated view for React application with the grid. Let's switch to another one. So the master view, for example, you see here, yes, it is React. You just navigate, you state, everything is React way. Okay, and all of these components, the code for them is generated for React. So I can even download this application and run it. In the interest of time, I already downloaded it so that I don't have to do npm install. I have this application here. And let's do an npm start. And let's close this. So I'm going to close this. Fire up localhost 3003. And I have a running React application generated from App Builder. You see the views that I had there. By the way, it's not just anything static. So here I have the grid bound to a service, which is a remote service. I have a Northwind remote endpoints, as you can see. So this grid is bound to, I believe, employees. Yes, it is bound to employees. So it's making a remote request, and the generated app here is doing the same thing. It's making a remote request in order to retrieve the employees. So expect beginning of next year to have all of the code generation targets available on production. As I said, you still cannot play around with this. I just wanted to do a sneak peek preview into what's coming in App Builder next. But that's all I had for today. I hope, if you haven't tried App Builder, if you haven't tried Ignite UI, get onto it, try it out. You will see it. It is amazing. It saves so much time. It makes development so much easier. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, Konstantin. That is awesome. Let me go ahead and share my screen and get back to my display here. And yes, so you guys can see my screen.
The presenter view. You need the other one.
So I'm going to swap my displays. How's that look?
Now it's good.
All right. So what I'm going to do is, because we have a lot of slides here that are part of this deck, but what I'm going to do is go all the way to poll time. When we share the deck, you'll get all those slides. They're basically a summary of everything that we've done. Not everything, but most of what we've done this year. So it'll give you a good idea of all of the stuff. I think this slide deck is like 43 slides. So you can see all these slides in here that just kind of highlight different features. But take a look at the poll and please answer the poll. This is what drives our roadmap. It's what we do. So whatever you see in the product is from customer feedback. Doesn't mean we can do it immediately, but it means that your requests, your features, the things you need end up as a priority on the roadmap. And I think, Konstantin, one of the most anticipated features is state management in the grid. We've been literally having people beat the doors down to get that from us. So thank you very much to the product team for delivering that in Blazor specifically, but it's nice to see it in React and web components. The React code gen, absolutely incredible. So excited to see that and then see where we go with that React code gen. I know we have a lot of customers that have been waiting for that as well. So to wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, as you're finishing the poll, we'll make sure that we hang out later to answer questions and all that. But as I mentioned earlier, App Builder is a platform. You start in design, you go to App Builder, you get code. You don't have to, you could skip step 1 and go right to step 2, but you always get step 3, which is production ready, pixel perfect code, no matter what you do in the product. So if you haven't tried it yet, you need to see it for yourself, because, we show these demos, the demos always look good, but until you actually try it yourself, you won't actually realize the benefit of what's actually happening. So when we talk about these UI kits and all the new ones that we ship today for Bootstrap and Figma, soon we'll ship a 4th UI kit. Our goal is that pixel perfect design to code experience. And if you think about AI and driving productivity, there's really 3 legs to this. There's design to code. So automating whatever the heck you're designing into actual production ready code. That's number 1 leg. Maybe you're not using design. Maybe you're just using a low code tool like App Builder, but no longer is it acceptable to hand code every screen. It's a complete waste of time, and management knows that. So they expect you to start looking at these low code tools. That's the first leg. The second leg is AI code assisted development. If you're not using GitHub Copilot, if you're not using ChatGPT, if you're not using Gemini or Bard or Watson X, you will be, because there's no reason to write most of the app code you're writing anymore. AI can do it for you. And then that third leg is about generating tests. AI is amazing at generating all of the tests that you need for your application. So you think about those 3 legs or 3 pillars of driving application development today. It's about low code, design to code. It's about AI assisted code, copilots, if we can use that term. And then finally, AI assisted test generation. So you have to think about that with your teams and what you're doing. Now, of course, with Infragistics, industry leading support is what we are all about. And we've always had amazing support, but we've expanded our support offering. And if you haven't jumped on the Discord channels yet, you want to, because you're talking to the dev team. Constantine jokes about, oh, blame it on the dev team. Well, he runs the dev team. He's in charge, but you also see him on Discord answering your questions. So make sure you're up on Discord. We have channels for everything, including Reveal, which we did have a question about in the chat today. GitHub is also another place. Everything's transparent with our products. You can go up and look at roadmaps, issues, bugs, feature requests, discussions. It's all on GitHub. We're unique in that way than any other component vendor out there. Our YouTube channel is full of good videos and help, and that's the idea. And then, of course, all of our roadmaps are up on GitHub as well, so please check them out. So if you haven't started, please get started today. Here's the links, igniteui.com, to go and check out all the samples that Constantine showed, especially the new Blazor web component and React stuff. And then, of course, the latest support for Angular. And then also up on the website for Ignite UI, you'll see all of the links to get the UI kits for the App Builder platform. And check out appbuilder.dev to start your free trial today if you haven't done that yet. And I want to thank Constantine and George for their amazing demos and all of their hard work. I want to thank Zdravko for answering questions online. I want to thank all of you for attending today. I know you have many options for your time, and we do appreciate you attending the webinar. This is our last webinar of the year for App Builder Ignite UI. We'll kick off a new series of webinars in January, talking about all the stuff that we're actually working on now. Some of the things that George and Constantine mentioned that'll actually ship in January. But we'll just continue rolling these webinars every 2 weeks for App Builder Ignite UI and Reveal. The Reveal webinar was yesterday. It's usually the day before the App Builder or Ignite UI webinars, if you look at the emails that we send out. But I hope you all have a good end of the year and Merry Christmas if you celebrate, or a good New Year if you celebrate that. But we will see you in January. And again, we appreciate it. And I'm going to stay online with others to make sure all the questions are asked. I think, George, one of the big requests was, can you make your kitchen sink available? So we'll either follow up in the follow-up email with a link to that, or you can share it with folks individually just through App Builder. So again, thanks everyone, and we will see you at the next webinar.